A big part of our mixed media project is texture. In this video, I'm going to review what you watched in the YouTube videos from Alfonso Dunn, and I'm going to show you how I want you to practice this in your sketchbook. So we're going to practice laying textures on form, and the way that you lay textures on form is you pay attention to the 3D aspect of it. You want your texture to follow the form of whatever it is you're drawing. And so we're going to use two really simple forms. We're going to use the sphere and we're going to use the cube, just like Alfonso does in his videos. I truly think his videos are amazing guides for this project. So for the sphere, the shape that I'm going to draw is just a circle because the sphere is created by value. I'm going to draw 3 different cubes. With cubes, it's really important that the sides are parallel because the basic shape of a cube is a square, and a square has all 4 parallel sides, or all sides are right angles, so you have parallel sides. So a cube has to also have those parallel lines. So these 3 and these 3, and then the top 3, they're all parallel with each other because they're all sides of a square, essentially. This cube I'm going to draw in 2-point perspective, so I'm starting on the corner, but the parallel lines still apply. I'm also drawing this cube as if I could see equal amounts of all 3 sides, whereas in the top cube I can see much more of the front than I can the top and the side. I'm going to draw the bottom cube in 2-point perspective again, but with much less of a view of the top and the sides. So it's a little bit more skewed, a little bit rotated in space. And the first thing you really need to pay attention to, just like Alfonso said in his videos, is the lighting pattern. So the lighting pattern is going to define where your texture is dark and light, and it has to make sense. So you get to choose where your light source comes from. We're gonna pretend like our light source is in the upper right corner, and we're going to start with our highlight. So our upper right corner, here's my light source. Our highlight is not going to begin on the edge of this form. The light is a little bit in front of this sphere, so my highlight is also in front of the sphere. And then all of my transverse lines right here are going to go around the cube. So I have my highlight, and then I can draw layers essentially. And this is what's going to set up my grid. The grid is really going to be key in laying down a texture and helping your guides. So I just showed you how the wrong way to do it. Your lines should curve around the form. We're really paying attention to the contour of this form. And this form is circular, it is round. So all of our lines are going to be rounded off. And they're going to converge as if they were going back around the backside of this form. I can't see that backside, but I know that line continues back there. So just like we have lines going horizontal around this sphere, we're also going to have lines that go vertically and they still curve. It is important to think about it going back around. If our vertices is where our highlight is, then they converge in the back in the opposite side of that vertices. We can't see that, but we know that that happens. So these lines need to curve like so, and sometimes they start to straighten out and curve the opposite direction as you work your way around the sphere. So my highlight is here, and then my shadow is at the bottom. I'm going to continue with that same pattern on all 3 of my spheres because they are all the same. And I'm going to draw my transverse lines here. And this is the basis of my grid. Again, my grid is going to be quintessential when I start to apply a texture because it's going to allow me to lay my texture on that form as if it were going around the form, just like my grid is doing here. For the cubes, the grid looks a little bit different. You know, you've got straight lines because the grid has to be parallel with the side that it is on, but the lines still go all the way around the cube. So here is the front side of my cube. There's my grid. And as the lines go around this corner, they have to change direction. Then they have to be parallel with that side's edges. So I drew my diagonal lines, and my vertical lines are still going to be vertical, but they're going to be a little bit closer together because I don't see as much of that side as I do the front. And the same with the top. Notice my lines are beginning where the front of my grid ends because it's all connected. They're going all the way around this form. And my lines on the top are also going to be a little squished together because I don't see as much of the top and the side as I do the front of this cube. On my next cube, I see almost equal amounts of all three sides. So my grid should look similarly spaced, I would say. But again, you have to pay attention to the edges of the side that you are on. They all have to be parallel. All of your lines are parallel with the edges on that side, but they all connect. They're all going around the cube. It's all one continuous line. And then on the bottom cube, I see much less of the top. So my lines are going to be much closer together up there. And I see more of this side. So my lines are going to be more spaced out. And then this side, I see a little bit less. So they're going to be a little bit closer together, but not as drastic as the top here, where the top, they're going to almost converge. And sometimes that happens. It's all about your perspective and where you're looking at the form from. But it is so imperative to remember those parallel lines. All of my grid lines on the side are going to be parallel with the edges of that side. That is key. If your lines are not parallel, your whole texture is going to look off. So now I'm going to switch over to Sharpie. You can continue working with pencil for as long as you want in your sketchbook when you are practicing these. For our project, we are going to use Sharpie. So it's your choice whether you switch. You also have pen in your art box if you want to practice using some pen in your sketchbook. So I'm going to lay this scale texture on this middle cube here. And I'm going to show you how this grid really helps me lay this texture down. So I've drawn it out flat, but that's flat. We want it to lay on the form of the cube. So I'm going to draw it just as the grid lines show me. So where the grid lines turn and change direction, my scales turn and change direction. Then I'm going to start on the second row in the middle. And again, I'm still just using those grid lines. But now I've come to a corner. So half of this scale is on one side and half is on the other side. So it's really important to follow those grid lines right there. Okay. The other important thing about texture is the edges. So nothing in nature really has like a really straight edge. Everything in nature that has texture has an edge that is natural, or that is kind of broken, I would say. So I'm not going to follow the edge of my cube. I'm going to make sure that my scales kind of break that edge in creating that realistic texture. Now I'm going to do the top, and I'm going to make sure that my scales fold over this edge. Again, I'm using my grid line to really show me where my scales should turn and change direction. So there's my first layer. I'm going to do my second layer. And I made my scales this direction, but see how they're going? They're bending over the edge of that square where I kind of find that edge. So I'm just going to fill in the rest of this with my scales. And then I'm going to make sure that the edges of my cube are irregular and nothing is a straight line. After I have my texture laid on my form comes the easy part. So now we can add value. Alfonso Dunn in his videos, he starts with value. You're welcome to start with that value, like that general value pattern if you want to start with it. I did not start with it, but now I'm going to overlay my entire cube with it. So I know that this side is going to be darkest according to my light source. My light source is kind of up to the top and on the left side. And so the top is going to be my lightest. This side is furthest away, so it's my darkest. And then the side that I'm working on now is my midtone. So I'm just kind of laying in really general hatch marks. I also like to curl my hatch marks and my hatch lines around the corners just a little bit, just to give it a gradient effect on all sides. I kind of curl it. And I'm making sure that my pen marks, my lines are maintaining the form. So this is a flat cube. So I'm making sure that my lines or my hatch marks are going vertically up and down, or they're going in the diagonal direction that again is parallel to the edges of that cube or of that form. Now I'm going in and I'm adding individual value to each scale. Scale is a texture that overlaps each other, and where the overlap happens, there's going to be more richer, darker values. So I'm going into each of these scales where there is an overlap, and I'm adding a little bit more value information individually. I'm going to do this on all three sides, maybe a little bit more on the darker side than on the top or on this side, but I want to try to like gradiate those values into the value of each individual scale. So I don't want it to be an outline. Outlines are bad, remember. We don't want it to be a heavy outline. We want it to be a fade of shadow, a fade of value. So I'm going in and fading where that scale overlaps another scale. You can darken the lines a little bit on textures like this because it just really aids that shadow sense, but you want to make sure that it's not just a dark line. You want to add a little bit of that those hatch lines or those hatch marks in order to blend that heavy outline into a shadow of sorts. So I'm doing this on all three sides. The top is my highlight. The other thing about highlights is that there isn't a lot of detail typically in highlights. So you can get away with half drawing your texture or only drawing parts and pieces of it, like an implied texture, because if it is really, really light, you really won't see all the details, just the same as if it's really, really dark, some of those details tend to disappear as well. So it's okay to not have everything detailed in that highlight section. And then I am going to go over all of these and erase my pencil marks. If you do this, please make sure that your pen has dried before so you don't smear your pen. And there it is. There's some scales on a cube. Now I'm going to apply a wooden plank texture to my sphere. This is my favorite texture to use because it tends to get like really rough and I love it. So I'm adding little lines in the planks. I also usually add dots to imply like nails in the edges. But this again is the flat version of what I'm going to apply to my form. So you do not want it to be flat. All of the lines have to follow the contour of your form. And the grid is there to help you. So here is my first plank. There's my nails. Maybe my next plank goes here. And I can see a little bit of the top because it's like curled up a little because it's like decaying. Maybe I can see the nails poking out the back. Then I have another plank up here that's a little bit underneath the other one and overlaps it. Here's another one. Notice that I'm not using the edge of my sphere as I drew it. I'm creating a new edge. That's that broken edge. That's that organic edge. You do not want it to all stop in the same spot or on the same line. It doesn't do that in nature, so you don't want to draw it like that. You want it to be more broken or more organic. I'm going to leave some space between this plank, and all of my planks tend to converge up here at the highlight. And it's going to get a little dark because I'm drawing those lines. But remember, if you don't want to draw lines up in the highlight, just let them kind of fade into the abyss, because where the highlight is much less detailed than everywhere else. Here I am adding the wood texture, which is just a series of lines that surrounds, they're kind of circular lines that surround knots of sorts, and the knots tend to be a little bit darker. But there's really just there's no pattern to it. It's just a repeated line that curves around and sometimes converges together. So there is my texture. Now I'm going to add value. I did not finish this sphere. I have more space on the other side, but I want to go ahead and show you how to add value to a circular form. So I'm using those hatch marks around the form in the direction of my grid. Remember that this part is the furthest part from the light source, so it is the darkest. So I'm also going to add hatch marks going up and around my sphere, creating a pretty deep shadow on the bottom of my sphere. I'm really leaving the highlight area alone. And then I'm going to go in and just define some of my details in my texture in my midtones, just so that I don't lose them completely. And then I'm going to continue adding value as it gradiates up around that sphere. Here's a bunch of examples. This is one that I've already done and I've finished with the planks. Here is a sphere with bricks. I think this needs a little bit more value, so I could go back over it and add some more lines. Add some more lines on the shadow side. This is one that I've started that has ropes. There's some fur, some scales. This one I use 2 different pens to add kind of a pattern in the fur. This one is glass. Glass does not have straight edges. They have edges that disappear, so my edges are broken. This one I attempted metal. It does have straight edges. I have woven. There's a wooden sphere, the woven cube, scales, and then this is a different type of weave. So all of these are up on Moodle. You can go check them out. And again, I really suggest watching the videos from Alfonso Dunn. He does a fantastic job talking about the key components of texture, which is value, repetition, and broken edges to create that